Hello Power Rangers Lightning Collection fans and Tokusatsu community. Welcome back to Toku Topics, the channel where we talk about Toku all of the time. And today, I have some information about Hasbro that comes from the darkest, deepest part of the internet, 4chan. That's right. There is some information about Hasbro stuff, and specifically Power Rangers stuff, from this 4chan thread in the toy threads on 4chan. Now this is a thread that's been going on for a pretty decent amount of November, and it comes from someone who claims to be a ex-marketing employee at Hasbro who worked on action brands specifically. Action brands are what they call of their boys marketing things, so Power Rangers fits directly into that. I believe also G.I. Joe and Transformers and things like that fall under that category for Hasbro as well. So this is someone who claims to have worked there. They didn't give too much information about themselves because clearly they don't want their identity out there, which makes perfect sense. And of course, we're going to talk about some interesting things that they mentioned here, but all of it should be and could be taken with a grain of salt. They did post a picture of their, what they claim to be their former ID card, business card for Hasbro. So hopefully, maybe this is actually information that is legitimate. And there's a lot of details in here that make me kind of believe that it is legitimate. So if someone asked about why the Power Rangers line, specifically the Lightning Collection, I'm assuming, has been plagued by so many QC issues, and they did specifically mention about how, like, Mighty Morphin Red's Lightning figure has been known to have a different shade of red on the arms and the torso and the legs. And basically, the person from Hasbro gave a pretty decent answer. They talked about how their lines were recently shifted over to Vietnam for their manufacturing, and that during the first years of toys being produced, there's QA problems as our Vietnam partners get up to speed. And they're talking about how all these parts could be made in different factories, which could be part of the reason why you have that slightly different coloration between all the different parts of the figure. It doesn't really excuse it, but I guess it kind of explains how that's a thing that happens sometimes. Now, there was also talking about MMPR Red again, because he's kind of one that we talk about a lot in terms of problems with the Lightning Collection, because it's like the most iconic Ranger and his figure's not the best. And they talked about specifically the helmet issue that people have with it. And this Hasbro employee, or ex-Hasbro employee, did claim that Hasbro is well aware of that issue that people had with it, and at least that means that, you know, they heard about it. They mentioned directly in that response about the Mighty Morphin Red helmet that they work directly with Toei with the assets that they give us. Believe it or not, despite owning the franchise, there are still things that we can't use because of Bandai still having residual rights on Super Sentai. So that makes sense. We've kind of seen a lot of weird things going on in the past couple of months in relations to rumors that come from Illuminati and other sources about Toei and Hasbro splitting after Dino Fury. I personally think those are definitely true, especially with what they want to go forward with the whole Power Rangers movie franchise that they want to start over on E1. So I definitely think that there's some interesting things in terms of the contract that Toei and Saban signed all those years ago that now Hasbro's kind of having to deal with. And that does get elaborated on here a little bit in these future answers, especially when it gets to the different assets that they use or have access to. Speaking of assets, they specifically mentioned the fact that Bandai gave them nothing when they took over from the toy license, and a lot of things that they have been able to make, if they wanted to get any kind of like reference from the toys, apparently they actually had to buy some of the old Bandai toys off of eBay to actually have something to look at or base off of, but they can't base anything off of it too directly because there's legal issues with that, so they can't do like an exact mold from Bandai, which does make me wonder how they were able to pull off the retro style packaging on the upcoming retro figures, since it looks so similar to the Flip Morphin figures back from the 90s, which of course is the aesthetic that they're going with. And they even were able to basically recreate the Zeo Megazord box for that figure this year. And the Power Morpher is very similar to the original Power Morpher box from the 90s. So maybe that's just kind of one of those things where it's just so slightly off enough to where it falls in a good legal gray area for them to be able to do it. That's my assumption. Now, what they got from Saban, so it says there was no resources from Saban, it was all with Toei. Saban just had the license and episodes. Toei does have an archive of older costumes and stuff, but they were not kept in good shape. Specifically, they said that the White Ranger costume was essentially in rags and falling apart, and that they need to remake the costumes whenever they have those Super Sentai crossovers, and their suits are tailored to the suit actors at the time, rather than the original versions. So I'm assuming that a lot of the suits that they're talking about here are kind of like the ones that were shown off on display at Power Morphicon in 2018. A lot of those I don't think had really seen the light of day in a while. We always kind of assumed that the suits came over from Japan over to New Zealand when they're filming Power Rangers, and of course they do make their own certain things. And we know that Hasbro ended up recreating a lot of the Beast Morphers suits, especially with the monsters, because the Go Busters footage is so old now that when they were going to make Beast Morphers, the suits had degraded so much because it had been nearly a decade. So that's not super surprising that a lot of it comes from Toei. I'm sure Saban had some kind of catalog of things, but I guess apparently they didn't really give them much, or they didn't really have much of them to give, so that is an interesting thing. Now, even though they do specifically talk about what Bandai and Saban gave them, people did ask about, does Hasbro just Google search for things? That's a good question, because we have had some very strange things happen, like the fact that a fan-made design for the Dragonzord coin is featured at the bottom of the Dragon Dagger, the fact that when they showed off SPD Red for the first time at that presentation at Magna Barcelona last year, they used some random cosplayer's photo instead of Brandon J. McLaren for Jack. So it does kind of sometimes seem that they just Google search things and sees what pops up. But they did specifically mention here in the thread that they can't actually speak on the validity of it, but they say that when they do their presentations, like the one at Magna Barcelona, they Google things, but they can't talk about designs. As far as they know, they used Toei assets. Now we know that recently, over the course of this past couple of months, John Warden has taken over. He was previously in charge of the Transformers brand design stuff. Now he's the head design for Power Rangers. We saw him at Hasbro PulseCon. It's kind of our introduction for him for the brand. And they were basically talking about how John is a huge fan of transforming robots, which makes perfect sense because he was in charge of Transformers for so many years. And he's a huge fan of Zords. So when people were asking about if we could see other things in the Lightning Collection other than figures, they basically said that Zords are probably something that they're going to really want to focus on here in the future. And I'm not surprised either. If we don't have our first Zord in the Lightning Collection in the next year, I'd be extremely surprised. Especially since that Zeo Megazord was more than likely at one point supposed to be in the Lightning Collection before it got pushed. So Zords are really, I feel, just a matter of time. But, you know, that's really all there was about Power Rangers in this thread. They did talk about how the original Burbank team that was in charge of Power Rangers, which consisted, I believe, of like Mona and some of those people that we saw through the different conventions from the last couple of months and really the last, like, over a year or so. But all the new people we've been seeing, like Loretta and John and everyone we saw at Hasbro PulseCon and on the Fan First Fridays recently are obviously the new team. And they did mention how Hasbro's kind of design timeline is about 2 years from like development to shelves. So figures that we're seeing out in 2020 were probably originally started to be conceived back in like 2018, early 2019. So basically I would assume because of that, that if not most, all, or some, a good portion of the 2021 figures are completely already decided and not by the current team. So I would say that the current team that we have really hasn't made any super groundbreaking decisions on what's going to be in the Lightning Collection yet, but they, I'm sure, are working on what's going to happen. If not next year, definitely 2022. So I think there's going to be a lot of really cool things happening in the Lightning Collection. And this thread was pretty interesting. I will leave a link down in the comments below, down in the description, or in the comments, you know, I could do both, where people can check this out. I don't know if this OP is going to continue to keep updating this thread. People were still asking questions in it as recent as this past Thursday, so it's certainly possible that they'll be coming back in to answer some more questions, but I thought this was pretty interesting, and like I said earlier, the stuff that they had talked about made it seem to me like it was pretty legitimate, especially that photo of a business card and everything. Then again, that could have been faked, but you know, I feel like this information was pretty relevant and just some cool things to discuss because you don't really get a behind the scenes look at things like that very often whatsoever. So guys, that's going to do it for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed this little side video. It was a little cool idea I wanted to try, and people said they wanted to see it. So of course, until next time, make sure you guys like, comment, and subscribe on this video. We're trying to hit 3K by the end of the year, and make sure you check out Lightning Storm every Saturday here on Toku Topics. We just had one this past weekend. This upcoming Wednesday will be the next episode of the Lightning Library. And later on this week, there will be another Lightning Storm extra episode to discuss what I think is going to happen in the Lightning Collection, in my personal opinion, in 2021. And of course, You guys are going to want to follow me on Twitter at two different places. At Living Ranger Key is my personal account, and at Lightning Fig PR for strictly Lightning Collection news. And of course, until next time, everyone, I'll see you on Toku Topics. Tokusatsu forever.